As the world descends on Bharat, brand Bharat has arrived, and how today the Prime Minister's Sabka Saath mantra became the guiding light for the world. This idea may have had its genesis in Bharat, but it is our gift to the world. Today, as the G20 summit officially began, Prime Minister gave the opening address behind a plaque that spelled out clearly Bharat, an assertion that now, when India is emerging as a world leader, it's time that we reclaim our roots, shun colonial baggage, and revert to the original name of Bharat.
आज G20 के प्रेसिडेंट के तौर पर भारत पूरी दुनिया का आह्वान करता है कि हम मिलकर सबसे पहले इस ग्लोबल ट्रस्ट डेफिसिट को एक विश्वास, एक भरोसे में बदलें। यह हम सभी के साथ मिलकर चलने का समय है और इसलिए सबका साथ, सबका विकास, सबका विश्वास, सबका प्रयास का मंत्र हम सभी के लिए एक पथ प्रदर्शक बन सकता है। वैश्विक अर्थव्यवस्था में उथल-पुथल हो, नॉर्थ और साउथ का डिवाइड हो, ईस्ट और वेस्ट की दूरी हो, फूड, फ्यूल और फर्टिलाइजर का मैनेजमेंट हो, टेररिज्म और साइबर सिक्योरिटी हो, हेल्थ, एनर्जी और वाटर सिक्योरिटी हो, वर्तमान के साथ ही आने वाली पीढ़ियों के लिए हमें इन चुनौतियों के ठोस समाधान की तरफ बढ़ना ही होगा। फ्रेंड्स, भारत की G20 प्रेसिडेंसी देश के भीतर और देश के बाहर इंक्लूजन का, सबका साथ का प्रतीक बन गई है। भारत में ये पीपल्स G20 बन गया। करोड़ों भारतीय इससे जुड़े। देश के 60 से ज्यादा शहरों में 200 से ज्यादा अधिक बैठकें हुई। सबका साथ की भावना से ही भारत ने प्रस्ताव रखा था कि अफ्रीकन यूनियन को G20 की स्थायी सदस्यता दी जाए। मेरा विश्वास है कि इस प्रस्ताव पर हम सबकी सहमति है।
The Prime Minister made a strong pitch for Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, where he said that Sabka Saath, Sabka Vikas and Sabka Vishwas will become the guiding principle to transform global truth deficit. In fact, as the Prime Minister emphasized, today the G20 takes a huge leap in being more inclusive after a concerted campaign. And after the COVID pandemic, when the world was grappling with the deadly virus, India extended a helping hand with vaccine Maitri. It supplied vaccines to 100 countries, provided drugs to 150 countries during the COVID pandemic under the Vaccine Maitri initiative. The digital economy built by the world's largest democracy is one of the key takeaways of the G20 summit as well. Prime Minister Modi also emphasized on several occasions that digital payment ecosystem has radically transformed governance, financial inclusion and the ease of living, something that in fact yesterday got a stamp from a World Bank report as well. But how far has India managed to make sure that it is the voice of the global south? What does that even mean? What do we gain from it? And how important is the inclusion of the African Union in the new G20? Berzin Wagmar, School of Oriental and African Studies, South Asian Institute and Center for Iranian Studies, and former India Fellow at the Royal United Services Institute, joins us from London. Sushant Sareen, Senior Fellow at ORF, and Abhijit Iyer-mitra, Senior Fellow at IPCS, join us along with Iyer Tangent, Senior Fellow at the Taihe Institute and Chairman Asia Narratives. I want to first start by asking you, Iyer Tangent, what is the meaning for you when India says that we are the voice of the global south?
Well, Well, it means that India is taking on the mantle or wants to take on the mantle of leadership, and so far we've seen a lot of benefits for India, but we have not seen the benefits for the global South. For example, India has been able to settle 4 of its cases, one still pending with the United States at the WTO, but there was not an agreement to get the U.S. to allow appellate judges so that other countries can get final decisions from that body. India has one of the highest incidence of disease. Yet there wasn't a big statement, a strong statement about how that should be handled, not only in India, but throughout the global South and other countries. There was a lot of progress with the U.S. in terms of getting a bilateral, not bilateral, actually, a joint venture in terms of making aircraft engines. However, there was no strong statement or push towards helping these developing nations with what they need, also in carbon tax, in the environment. This global South was promised $100 billion a year. So far, only 10% of that has been delivered, and questionably in some cases, because most of the money has gone to developing nation companies. It would have been nice if there had been a stronger statement there that this has to be taken care of. So we'll see. Hopefully this will be addressed in the leadership meeting, but at this juncture, it does not look like those issues will be on the forefront.
Okay, several sticking points still remain, Sushant Sareen. Not a very positive outlook?
Look, it depends on what your perspective is. Number one, Padmaja, I think we need to be very clear. We are not looking for a leadership role. I think what we are looking for is partnership with the global South. And there's a big difference between, for example, the Chinese version of how development around the world has to take place, which is predatory, which forces countries into debt traps, which saddles them with these white elephant projects, which are worth nothing to nobody. In fact, that entire BRI scheme, which has been touted to the heavens, please show me one country which has actually profited from any of those projects, or for that matter, Chinese companies which might have made some money, but how much money has China actually lost because of this? So that's a net negative, right? So what we are looking for is much more a partnership-oriented approach, development-oriented approach. Again, it's very easy to confuse between what might be happening at a bilateral level, and there are much more complications at multilateral levels, because there are competing interests which need to be merged together so that some kind of a consensus, or at least a common minimum program can be reached. And there can be a consensus developed around those points. But if you want to mix up what might be happening at a bilateral level, which is a completely different trajectory from what might be the outcomes at a multilateral level, in which, incidentally, there are some countries which are actually playing spoilers. People are entitled to do that, but that does not deviate from the fact that the final statement is still to come out. There are many new things which India has tried to bring onto the table of the global agenda, at least at the economic level, at the multilateral level. And if anybody thinks that any one summit or any one meeting is going to be solving all the world's problems in one big bang moment, then clearly that's not going to happen. It's a process. It's a process in which you keep pushing the envelope. It's a process in which you keep bringing in, you keep adding on things to an agenda so that you reach an optimum point. And that is what this effort is. But it is important to recognize that many of the issues which had not really come onto the table in the past, or had not come onto the table with the kind of salience that India has given to them in the last 1 year, have now come onto the table. And that includes things like the membership for the African Union. You cannot have a global economic system in which you exclude almost 50 countries of Africa from that particular, what the world is trying to achieve. So you need to bring many of those things onto the table, which I think India has done fairly successfully. Now, whether there is a final document, there is an outcome statement, or there is nothing of the sort, it does not deviate from the fact that there has been a lot of progress that has been made in terms of what the global agenda, the global developmental agenda needs to be. And then there are the minilaterals. For example, there's a lot of talk of some projects, including a railway project between Saudi Arabia, UAE, Oman, India, and the United States. I think it's a great project.
Mr. Tangent, it's incremental. I mean, beauty lies in the eyes of the beholder. So does progress. At the very least, we've seen today African Union is now included.
Yeah, I think that's very important. I would agree on this point with my colleague. But the issue is the G20 has to act. Remember, the G20 was created because the G8 at that time was unable to deal with the global financial crisis created by the United States. And today we face another inflection point. The G20 has to lead. India said that they're leading it, and especially the voice of the global South. It doesn't do anybody any good if you add more countries and more interest to a dysfunctional organization. So I'm actually hopeful that something will come out of this. We need more multilateral institutions, not less.
Abhijit Iyer-Mitra, not much gain from adding more countries to what essentially is dysfunctional.
Well, we've not added more countries, we've added just one more grouping. Because remember, look, this is a bit of a, it's a catch-22. How do you get action done unless you make it more broad-based and representative? On the other hand, can you realistically, in this age and time, have 20 countries come up with the rules and expect the whole of Africa will just agree to it without representation? I mean, India doesn't agree to follow rules without representation. We aren't at the NPT, therefore we're not going to do certain things. Remember, that was always our position with the NPT or the CTBT and things like that. So, I think there is the problem that when you do add more people, that is why we have not added more people, we've added one voice, which is the African Union, which will first have to get its house together, agree to certain positions, which then get represented by that AU representative in the G20 meetings.
But why is India so keen to have the African Union? What do we stand to gain from it?
Personally, we stand to gain a lot because in terms of climate finance and climate technology and things like that, see the things like solar, a lot of us have solar in our own houses. We have pioneering programs. I think India has more installed solar than most other countries do. I think we even have more installed green energy than Germany does, for example. The problem has always been the cost of storage. And that is something the West is very, very good at because technology grows geometrically, not arithmetically. And with all the systems in function in the West, storage is growing very far ahead in the West. It is not growing so much in India and the developing countries. We need that thing to come to us. Remember, we made a very ill-fated alliance with China called, I forget what the grouping was, where we were both meant to play, climate deniers, and we were both meant to gain the benefits from it. And as usual, China used us, dumped us, and signed the agreement with America, left us high and dry, screwed us over. So we're very careful that that isn't going to happen again. And I think this is a replay at this collective bargaining, collective negotiation thing where, first of all, you do the guilt trip on the white countries. Hey, you guys produce most of the greenhouse gases.
And there'll be louder voices instead of India just speaking alone.
Louder it'll be louder, but we'll have a lot more, we want to be
the leaders,
the rich boys, but we're not, we're quite crafty. We're quite happy to play the, the first standard, the junior school kids against the senior school kids when we need to.
Well, if it works for us, why not? Barzin Wagmar, major step forward or inconsequential, the inclusion of the African Union, how do you look at it?
It is of tremendous import. Look at it this way, 76 years on, India has consistently supported Africa in states, right from the decolonization in the 1940s at the UN Forum. So this is all the piece with what is inclusive of outcome. compared to the USSR and China, who had proxy wars during the Cold War, and the decimation and destruction that took place across southern Africa, particularly Portuguese East Africa. And that also included the Cubans. So we are talking about authoritarian regimes who had an impress on the African scenario. India had nothing of the sort. Please remember that over the last 7+ decades, during the Cold War and the post-Cold War era. That's number one. And number two, even in the present context, India may not have the moolah to throw as China does as part of the BRI project and to leverage it as an instrument of governance. But it does show that development can be done in an accountable, transparent polity and through representative means. China cannot show anything of that sort, and present-day Russia only foments havoc with the Wagner Group and coups across sub-Saharan Africa. So India does stand out as a salient, singular instance. That needs to be pointed. Moving on from the African aspect of the Union's inclusion today. Prime Minister Meloni has arrived after formally removing Rome from the BRI initiative. Please note that. And President Biden will depart Delhi for Hanoi, where in all likelihood, Vietnam is supposed to sign a comprehensive strategic partnership. Such is history, and the irony is now, as Vietnam comes full fold. And I was just talking about the Cold War a moment or two ago to you. And if Vietnam does that, Padmaja, make no mistake, Canberra and Tokyo will follow suit. And it is all in line with what is India's perspective and has been asking for. That is American presence in the Indian Ocean. Diego Garcia may fold up at some point in time, but a further permanent presence is required in the Western Indian Ocean, and the US will in times to come on board. And that also segues with Prime Minister Sunak's Indo-Pacific tilt, where also we have taken a particularly strong stance. Just notice the war games that Russia and China just conducted off the coast of Japan a month or two ago. That has to be put into context too. So with all this happening, it must be pointed out that India at the G20 can make a much more of an impact than it does at a talking shop, which the SCO is and remains pretty much for all purposes and intents. And last point, Padmaja, the railway project, which obviously includes sea links too, if you go west out of Bombay through the Arabian Sea, is still on the drawing board, but it is very, very promising, because I just published on this when this SCO Goa summit took place, that the so-called North-South corridor, Bombay, Bandar Abbas, Astrakhan, St. Petersburg, has yielded nothing since 2008. Only 3 dry freight runs have taken place to date between St. Petersburg and Bombay at the Novoshevo Vashi port. Nothing has come of it. Armenia and Georgia are in chaos. The war in Ukraine. Kazakhstan, there's a Russian secessionist movement in the north of the country. Iran has barely laid the line tracks, and Iran is in a meltdown for all purposes and intents. So that's going nowhere. India needs a westward corridor, and this is just going to be something that will be promising. It may still sound pie in the sky as I speak, and I wouldn't want to jump bridges before we come to it. Like I said, it's still on the drawing board, but it is a way forward, and it needs to be taken up very seriously, because the north-south corridor is not going anywhere.
You know, speaking of which, a very interesting aside, the only person to have been received by a cabinet minister was actually MBS. He was received by our Railways Minister, Ashwini Vaishnav. Wonder if anyone has to read something into that. Yes, go on.
Received King Abdullah at Delhi airport in person on his visit in 2006. So that tells you that Riyadh is taken very seriously by New Delhi. I distinctly remember Dr. Singh visiting and greeting King Abdullah, the late King Abdullah, on the tarmac at Parliament back in 2006 on his state visit to India.
All right, taking a very quick break. We're back on the other side with much more. The first images coming out of the meetings. There's the Prime Minister with Joe Biden. Again, a lot of warmth, you know, considering that they have met for the second time in a span of just a few months. The body language, of course, many people argue that too much emphasis is laid on body language, but there's no missing the very, very clear messaging being done with the kind of interactions that Prime Minister Modi has with Joe Biden. A quick break, back in a minute.